All right, welcome to the Taelmoor Scenario Jam. Thanks for joining everyone who is here. I am Eli Delventhal. I'm one of the co-founders of Delve Bros, a company of three literal brothers. Delventhal, if you get it, haha. I'm the guy in the middle there in the little icon. I've got the orange shirt, and my brother Zach, older brother, is here. He's in the purple shirt. Say hi, Zach. And Willem is not here. He's the yellow shirt. He's working. All right, so yeah, what a fool. So just calling out for people who are here, this is being recorded, so if you ask questions, you will be on the recording. All right, so jumping in here, just gonna really quickly talk about what Taelmoor is. Here is a picture of the board game against a background, one of the backgrounds from the game with the cool elf character there holding a phone. It's essentially a dungeon crawler, like a really simple, like Dungeons and Dragons type game, except it uses an app to simplify things. So the app is the Dungeon Master. The app has the different scenarios in it, tells you what's happening, and then you scan different stuff as you go. Kind of like a choose your own adventure. Here's a cool little video of Zach slamming down some pieces. This is sort of how the game goes. You are told when to add new pieces into the game, and then you pop them onto the different rooms as you move through. And here's another one. When you scan something, you pull the back of the piece and you scan it on the app, and then the app will show you a message. Combat is a little bit different. It is using a simplified deck builder, so you have actual cards, and then you scan the card that you want to use. All right, so I kind of mentioned it all here already, but the overall magic of this game probably is that you are in a cooperative game and you're sort of part of the mystery. Like Dungeons and Dragons, you are unraveling it together and you're sort of seeing what's behind the curtain as the app reveals it. All right, so the jam, moving on to that. We will be writing some role-playing scenarios, or Taelmoor scenarios to be more specific, using our engine. You can see the select scenario list from our app here. There's about, I think, 11 scenarios now, maybe something like that. We've got a new one coming out really soon. And the scenario editor allows you to build scenarios really easily without any code at all if you want, or you can do a little bit of code to do a really complicated scenario. And part of this whole kickoff is I'll be jumping in and kind of teaching people how to do that with a tutorial. So the overall intended value of this jam is a combination of things. For some people, a lot of people will be like newer to the game industry, interested in learning about it and so on. In those cases, this is a great way to work on an actual project with actual tools that are being used professionally and building something on top of like an established system with established lore. That's really great because if you join an actual company and you're trying to work as a narrative designer or a game designer, they're going to be usually using some kind of proprietary tools, and you're going to have to fit within the constraints that they have and so on. So this is really good for that kind of learning and being exposed to that. It's also a great opportunity if you just enjoy Taelmoor and you want to write some scenarios, or you want to do the equivalent of playing a D&D scenario with your friends without needing to have a dungeon master. And hopefully it's fun. Okay, so I'm going to jump into sort of recommended guidelines as you write these scenarios. You don't have to follow these constraints, but given that you only have so much time to make scenarios, and you shouldn't really spend a huge amount of time probably, but you could if you want, you should aim for something like 30 to 45 minutes of length in the scenario. The scenarios we have now are averaging around 90 minutes. It kind of depends on how many players there are and so on, but generally they average 90 minutes. The longest we have is around 2.5, maybe 3 hours, and the shortest we have is 60 minutes. So these are going to be kind of micro scenarios. Because of that, really, you want to focus on keeping it as simplified as possible. Start with something very simple. Start with a single central conflict, because what's going to happen is it's going to end up being much, much bigger than what you think. Like, I think Zach was working on his first scenario, and you had what, like 12 rooms or something, Zach, and then you realized that's not going to fly. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why we have down here maximum of three rims. Um, and again, these are constraints, but that they're recommended. You can do whatever you want here, but in general, I would definitely start by following these constraints. And then after you do some play tests, if it seems like the players want a little more exploration, or maybe they feel like there's not enough options and it's very linear, then you might add another room in, or you might add in some more items or whatever. One thing I want to specifically call out here from this list is the dialogue enabled NPC. This is a good dialogue enabled NPC. You should only have one. If you have a very simple NPC that barely talks about anything, for example, in this scenario, the big score, there's this dwarf you can talk to, and he literally says one thing, and then he just like repeats himself like, get out of here and stop talking to me if you ask about anything else. Although he is technically a dialogue enabled NPC, it's very little effort to write that. But if you're trying to write really good dialogue in Taelmoor, it is extremely difficult. It takes a lot of time. So that's why you want to stick with just one. Okay, moving along. So you could make teams if you want, but just calling out that every scenario we have is a single writer. So it's totally acceptable and even sometimes desirable to just have one person on a team. But you end up being a bit of a jack of all trades, and I would definitely recommend like leaning on other people for advice, doing play tests, kind of getting help when you need it and that sort of thing. And that's sort of what I will be around for, like the programmer side especially. I know a lot of people who are narrative designers don't really know very much about programming or logic. So if you want to do something really weird and intricate in your scenario, I can help you figure out how to do that. Everything really is essentially possible. You could do basically anything as long as you're using the pieces in the game. For example, I had an idea to do like an Among Us type thing. It would theoretically be possible. But the further you get away from the simple dungeon crawling, the more you need a programmer. And I would also call out that sometimes the difference between a writer and a game designer can be really stark, and you want to think about whether you are building the best game and also writing the best prose, because sometimes those are different skills. Okay, so here's a few tips for making a really strong scenario. The first is, I kind of mentioned this already, but start with your core concept. Even though you're in a larger game where there's a bunch of different scenarios and we reuse some of these characters, like for example, the first scenario has you in the Shattered Band Mercenary Guild. We reuse the Shattered Band a bit and some of the others. Um, don't think of yourself as part of a giant epic that all the others are in. You're making a self-contained story. It's like a one-shot campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. It's got to be something that can be done very simply. There's one core concept. For example, escape from a prison or rescue somebody, or I just played an actual one-shot in D&D where I was manning a demonic tavern. Stuff like that. Very small, not many locations, and so on. That's what you want to focus on. And same as before, build the central moment, that core idea, that core conflict or decision. And then as you play test, maybe add some more around it with polish. And something to talk about here is an engagement curve. This is a game design concept any game designers will be familiar with. This is really important in pretty much every interactive media. So not just games, but like theater often will follow this. This is kind of like the three-act structure, which Shakespeare popularized. Anything that like an audience is there for and kind of a part of, I think you want to do this. And even movies will follow this to some degree, or like movie trailers. So it's a really important concept to understand. The y-axis here is aesthetic intensity, which you can just think of as like fun, or like, how much the thing's drawing them in. And then the x-axis is how far along the experience you are. So at the very beginning, you can see that you have a relatively low level of engagement because you're just getting introduced. So if you think about like the video game The Forest, you're flying in an airplane with your son at the very beginning. It's nothing remarkable or interesting. And then the hook needs to happen very quickly. And the hook you can see is the second most intense moment, aside from the climax. That's what gets people to commit to your game and stay with your game. So going back to the forest example, your plane then crashes. and then you see some random islander people abduct your son. That's a really big hook where you're like, holy crap, like I had this moment getting close to this kid, and then suddenly they're gone. What happened? Then after that, you have this drop. That's when the player really starts to like figure things out and play. They are spending time in the forest, again, example, like you're starting to learn how to craft and so on, figure out where you are, how to make your weapons, try to find where these islanders are. And over time, you're going to have encounters with the islanders, and then you're going to have to craft more things. You're going to keep leveling yourself up, and so on. And then eventually, the climax, which most commonly in a video game is something like a boss battle, which you can totally do in Taelmoor. Works quite well, but you could also do something like a really complex puzzle or just a really exciting moment. But it's something that people want to feel that real strong sense of satisfaction. And then the denouement is the very end. That's sort of like the epilogue, talking about the finale, what happened. So an example is a scenario we have called the Deal Made in Fire. This core concept is very simple. There's a missing farmer, and you're hired to go find him. And then you show up in this old castle, which is abandoned, and you see at the very beginning, the hook is now kind of building. There is a sort of figure, like a silhouette, standing there, like next to a throne. And you're like, what is going on with this guy? He's not moving. He looks kind of menacing. You go and touch him, and then he dissolves into dust, and a bunch of rats climb out of his body. That's the hook. It's a very surprising moment, an intense moment, and then you have to fight all of these rats. And then there's various intermediate peaks as you go through the scenario where you are solving puzzles, you're finding out more about what's going on in this castle, why you're there, what happened to the farmer, and so on. And the climax finally happens where it's a really big decision around what you're going to do for the future of Taelmoor, and you have to fight a boss. And then after that, you find out sort of the results, and you finish the scenario. Okay, so next Friday we'll have a showcase, which means basically people will be able to show off the scenarios they made. We can kind of celebrate and decide which ones we like the best and play them together. And so total you have about a week. So we're going to meet again at Friday at 3, and then people will be able to celebrate. And if you can't make it, you can totally just like record a video of you playing your game and throw it on Discord. Also, the scenario editor creates QR codes for you that you can scan from the app to play your scenario. You can drop those QR codes right into the Discord to have other people play your scenario. So that'll be really fun to do throughout the week as well. And really, I want to call out that you should work as little or as much on your scenario as you want during the week. So it doesn't have to be the full week where you're working like 40-hour week or more. Just do what feels right. If you just want to work on the weekend, go for it. The week time is there so that you don't have to do a crazy 48-hour period like a normal game jam. We're really hoping to release some scenarios, at least one. I think that's sort of what we talked about in terms of having a winner for the jam here. If a scenario is high enough quality, then we would love to put it into the app, into a community scenario section, which will be shorter scenarios from people like you who have made a scenario. And then you'll be able to put yourself down as a Delve Bros writer. You'll be able to say that you're in a public product, and then also we'll pay $100. I know it's not a ton of money, but it's all we can do, really. We're a small indie company, barely paying our own bills. One thing I want to call out is the asterisks here. We are expecting before we ship any scenarios that that scenario has done at least 2 play tests with one of the Delve Bros, and then has taken the feedback from the play tests and implemented it. And of course, we have to call out that like it's possible we won't ship anything. There could be some problems with the app, or we could decide maybe there's a really good scenario, but it's very sexualized or something, and that just doesn't match our brand, so we wouldn't ship that, for example. So just putting that caveat there. All right, so make sure to use the Discord, share as you go, keep popping out what you're doing, and if you need to find teammates, wait till the end of this tutorial and ask around. All right, so let's dive in. That's the end of me rambling. So first thing you're going to do is jump over to taelmoor.com/editor, which I'm going to do right now as well. You're going to click on the Help tab, click on Tutorial Simple Scenario, and then you're going to do that again in another window. So you can see I have here, the Help tab, and then Tutorial Simple Scenario. And Taelmoor.com editor. You can see this is a really long tutorial that teaches you how to make a scenario. And by really long, I mean it should take you probably about a half hour to 45 minutes to go through. All right, so you can also download the completed files from the tutorial if you click on this link. And one thing I recommended here was make another window and then just go to the editor in that. And that way you can have one window that's just the Help tab and one window that's you actually editing your scenario. Alrighty, so do you all want to go through the tutorial now together? Should I stop recording? People do the tutorial on their own? What's the vibe? What do you think, Ronald? Well, do you personally want to go through? Okay, no worries. Okay, so let's go through it then. So let me know when you, Ronald, and Zach, if you want to follow along as well, have your tutorial set up. By that I mean you've jumped in here, and then we can get going. So I'll wait a minute. Sweet. All right. So I'm going to jump through. I think what you should do is just follow along and like do this actual stuff as we go through. So the first step is you will have an empty thing, and I'm gonna just start over. You're gonna have an empty like browser with like nothing in it. So first thing you're gonna want to do is make a new scenario. To do that, you're gonna type in a name of your scenario. So I'm gonna put in, let's call it Death Malfeasance or whatever, because that's what the name of this tutorial is. But you can name it whatever you want. All right. And then you will see that the top is the name of the scenario that you created, and it's going to have no name to it. If you go to the Edit tab, you'll find that there's mostly nothing in here yet, and that's because we haven't set anything up. So the next step, it says, is to name your scenario. So what we do is we jump over to the Strings tab here inside the Edit tab, and you're going to find a bunch of things that you can edit here. These strings will be exposed in the app, so if you saw in the presentation here, this stuff here is what that data is. So it's going to say who it's by, the name of the scenario, the difficulty, how long it is, a description, and all that stuff. That's where this comes from. So we want to edit all those to match it. So let's say the author is Eli, and the description will say, in this scenario, I won't say that actually because that's redundant. Two wizards have done bad stuff. One of them is guilty. It's your job to find out who. You can put whatever you want here, but that is the theme of the sample scenario that we're working on here. You can put whatever difficulty you want. You should probably figure this out after some play tests. If people have a really hard time with your puzzles or the combat or something, you might put something harder than easy. This one is easy. And the duration, it's only about probably 15 minutes. And then the editor, this actually doesn't show up, so you can just do whatever you want there, but I'll put Eli again. The tags show up like this. This one only has one tag, dialogue heavy. There's space here for 3 tags. So let's put crime and magic and donuts, spelled the proper way, of course. Whatever you want to put in there. And then the name of the scenario, probably the most important thing. So this one is called Death, Artistry, Malfeasance. Quite a mouthful. All right, so we can save the changes at this point. You should do it often. What it does is you'll see that it downloaded 2 files. It'll download the data file. Oh, it downloaded 3 files, my bad. So it downloaded the data file, the English file, and then the export file. The export file is used when you run it in the app. So if I want to load my scenario back up later, I go to this File tab, and then you can see Scenario and Strings. I'm going to browse, and those files that I just downloaded, there's the scenario, deathmalfeasance.json, and then the strings. There's the English file, and then upload those. Obviously nothing changed because it's the exact same file. But every time you save, it's going to dump that stuff on your disk, so you're going to end up with tons of them, but I would still recommend saving, as this is an alpha version of the editor, and it could, in some weird case, maybe like erase something. So just save often, just like working on anything else. And that's pretty much it for the start there. All right, so next step here, we did all of this already. We're going to add some pieces to our game. So most importantly here is just a concept to understand, which is that in Taelmoor, you cannot do anything without a piece. Every single interaction that you do involves a QR code. So if you only have, like we have here in elements, if you only have one piece, so we have the room, then that's literally the only thing that players will be able to mess with aside from their characters. So it's tough to have a scenario with just one piece. So that's why we often want to start with the pieces. And even before that, if you're making your own scenario from scratch, then you often want to think about what your scenario actually is. So you might like sketch out some ideas of what the overall flow is, what happens, what the characters are, and then you can come up with the pieces from there. So what we're going to do is, following the scenario here, how about I have both of the windows open, like this. There we go. All right, so following the tutorial here, we're going to edit the stuff. We're going to select a room here, and we want to start with like a magic-y room. So we're going to find a tile that looks magical. Let's go with A7, which has like a wizard circle in here. If I wasn't so zoomed in or zoomed out, you'd be able to tell. So we're going to do the magic room, and we also want to give it a custom key. We don't want to just call it room. This is how you refer to it throughout the rest of the editor. So it's really important that this is unique and something you can understand. So I'm going to call this cauldron room. I recommend doing what's called lower camel case for the names of everything, which means one word and then having capitalized. Just as long as you're consistent, it makes your life a lot easier. We'll notice we have an error that popped up, which this calls out. So let's fix that in a second, but first we'll name this. This is going to be Argonas's laboratory. This is the string, the text that users see when they interact with this room. So what's this error mean? The starting room does not exist. So to fix that, we go to the layout. The layout is how we determine what the different rooms are. You'll see we're still talking about this old thing called room, which no longer exists. So let's just change this to be the cauldron room. Save that, and then we'll change this starting room to be the cauldron room. Okay, that should be fixed. There's a bug that causes this to not go away, but we can just close it, and if it doesn't come back, it means it's fixed. So we're starting in the cauldron room, and that's all we have so far, and it's called Argonas's laboratory. Nice. All right, so next step is to add a bunch of other stuff. We've got a big list of things here. So let's make Argonas, who sits in his laboratory. This is going to be a character, so let's find his QR code in here. We're going to go with the old man. You can see we have all of the rooms, the items, the doors, even the characters in here. And we're going to go with the old guy. There he is. Click on that. All right, so this is who Argonas is going to be. That'll mean that the players need to use this specific piece to mess with him. We're going to call it Argonis. And we're going to name him Argonis with a capital A. And he is going to be in, not everywhere, but in a specific room, the cauldron room. Then we save this here. I recognize that this interface right here is really bad. It's on my to-do list to fix. But basically, the location, the importance of this is that when someone is in a specific place, then they can be interacted with. If they are not there, so say that he was in a different room and we were in the cauldron room, then we wouldn't be able to mess with him. Like, you can't talk to him because he's not there. The cauldron room, you see, has no location. That's because it's a room. It is a location. Something's considered a room once you add it to the layout. So Argonis is not a room because he's not in the layout. So let's add the rest of the stuff here. We're going to add a magic book for Argonis. We'll put it there. Also, if anybody feels like I'm going too fast or has any questions, please just interrupt. Call this book. You could. You totally could. Yeah, although I think the app would probably break if you did that, right? Yeah, so the editor, this is something that's worth calling out. If you want to do some really weird stuff like that, the editor has few opinions about that, and neither does the core engine that runs the scenarios. The engine is shared between the editor and the app, so it runs the scenarios exactly the same way. But there might be something like the app's trying to find an image to show on the screen, and it can't because it's a character and not a room or something like that. So if you're doing weird stuff, you just want to test it in the app right away, see if it works properly. If it doesn't, then you know that you can't really do that. But you should, I think, be able to make Argonis a room, and you would have to walk to Argonis and search him like a room and all of that stuff, and it should work. And that's actually a funny idea, so we should maybe do that sometime. So the book here, we're going to name this Argonis's Book of Spells. And we're going to put it in, once again, specific room, add a new room, and that's going to be the cauldron room, Argonis's laboratory. So both Argonis and his book are in the laboratory. He's looking at them there. Let's add another thing in. We're going to add in the cage. And this is an item now. Here's the cage item, so we select that. So it's that item with the J4 QR code. We're just going to name it cage. And this is going to be in another room that we haven't added yet. So let's actually add that first. Going to add the cell. This is the prison cell where you put everybody. By everybody, I mean whoever's the criminal. We'll call it the cell. This still says it's everywhere because we haven't clarified that it's a room. So let's go back to the layout here. We're going to add another. We don't want it to be Argonis. We want it to be the cell. So now the cell is considered a room. You'll notice this add connection button, which we'll do in a minute after we add all of the elements. This is how you make rooms like how you can walk between rooms. Right now these are two totally isolated rooms, so you would not be able to walk between them. So we'll fix that later. So we have the cell. Great, it doesn't show us a location because it is a room. So let's go back to the cage then, and we can move this to a specific room. It can be in the cell. Great, I hit the green checkbox. The cage is now in the cell. All right, let's add in, we already did the cauldron room. We're going to add another room. It's going to be the experiment room. This is the other wizard's laboratory. Let's choose another cool, mystic-looking area. I like this AB one. And experiment, whoops, that's not what I called it. It's Golgos's laboratory. Golgos is the other wizard. And once again, has a location because we have not yet told the editor that it's a room, but we'll do that in a second. Actually, we might as well do it now. Add a new one. Not Argonis, but the experiment room. Awesome. And we might as well link all these rooms together while we're here. So this is really helpful if you're making a bigger scenario. 3 rooms is not many, but if you were doing, 6 rooms or more, to think about how they're all linked together. And so drawing on a piece of paper, or if you have the board game, pulling the pieces out and just sticking them down on a table really helps just visualize everything. I know, especially since it's simple, that this is just going to be a straight line. The cauldron room is going to be to the west of the cell, so I'm going to add a connection to the cell here. It's already got cell there. I'm going to make it so it's east. You can put literally anything here. I could say that they are connected via poop if I wanted to, and it works fine. It's nice to stick with the directions just to make it easier for you to kind of visualize it in your head. And at one point, there might be a feature that sort of draws your layout over here if you use compass rose directions. But for now, it literally, as long as they're connected somehow, it will allow you to move between those rooms. So the cell here, we're going to connect it to, oh, is there a question? Yeah, yeah, great point. So this is Tabletopia here, and you can just search for Taelmoor in the box, and you'll see it's right there. And if you start a game here, like hit play solo or something, then you'll just, yeah, be able to drag around 3D pieces. Like here's a screenshot of what that looks like. So great point, Zach. This is a really good way. If you don't have the game, or if it's just easier to do it all on your computer where you can sort of visualize how everything looks. All right, so the cell, we know that it's linked to the cauldron room. The reason that, and I had add connection to do that, but the reason that this isn't automatic, like you notice how this says east, this does not say west, is because you could have like a one-way link. Like maybe there's like a chute or something. So maybe one is above the other one and there's no way to go backward. So you have to do links in both directions if you want the rooms to be movable in both directions, which you do in most cases. So we'll link to the cauldron room, and we'll also link to the experiment room to the east. And then finally, the experiment room is linked to the cell on the west. So to review, we basically did a straight line. You go from the cauldron room east to, oh, I messed something up. This is a problem with the editor that's just a bad design. Make sure you always hit this green check mark, or I won't say what you did. So the cauldron room goes east to the cell, and then the cell goes east to the experiment room and west back to the cauldron room, and then the experiment room goes west to the cell. Great. Green check marks. Cool. So they're all linked together. We know they're all rooms. Awesome. Going back to the elements, we see this is not a location. Let's add the other things we have. So we need to add Golgos, the wizard. That dude is going to be the cool-looking sorcerer guy. Nice. His name is Golgos, and he is in the experiment room, which is his room. Hit the green check mark. Never forget that. And now we're going to add a couple more items. We're going to add gore, which is the smoking gun. It's how you find the killer. Someone's got some hidden gore in their room. And we're going to call this a hidden corpse. And that is going to be, I'm spoiling the ending, in a specific room, the cauldron room. Turns out the kindly old man was an evil bad guy. And finally, notes. This is going to be something in Golgos's room. We'll use JY. We'll call it Golgos's experiment notes. And it is in a specific room. In the experiment room. Hit the green check mark. All right, so we've now added all of the elements that we're going to have in our game. If you think back to this recommended list that we had here, where was that? There we go. 3 items, 3 rooms, 1 dialogue-enabled NPC. How are we doing here? We've got 1 item. This is kind of an item, but it's barely going to do anything. So 2, 3, 4. We've got 4 items. Okay, we're looking okay there. We've got 3 rooms, And then we've got two NPCs that are going to be dialogue enabled. So it's interesting to see that in this tutorial even, which makes a very simple scenario, that we're already kind of moving beyond those constraints. This is already going to end up being a pretty long scenario compared to what you might be able to do in a single weekend. So just keep that in mind that like this is already about the scope that you want to expect making. So we've already moved them all into different rooms. Awesome. We can skip this section. We kind of went ahead. And the different locations. And the next step is to test. So jump to the play button and hit this little arrow thing. It'll start a new game. And so the first thing that we'll do is select characters. I'm just going to do the barbarian and the cleric. You need at least 2 characters. And then we're going to hit done. So the game has now started. Looks like we are in the magic room, which is Argonas's laboratory, A7. Awesome. This is a bug, I guess. This should say Argonas's laboratory. It's not your fault, it's my fault. And now we can do a bunch of actions based on what's here. So this really closely emulates what you would do with the physical game. You can examine stuff, you can move places, you can interact with things, and you can use one thing on another thing. So like I could use Argonas on his laboratory, and nothing's going to happen if I did that. So we're just testing that this works. So let's see if we can move to the room successfully. So we're going to try to move to the cell. Nice, we're in the cell now, and then we'll try to move to Golgos's laboratory. Great, that also works. Now, can we move all the way back to Argonas's laboratory? Yes, we can, and that's because the rooms are linked along a string, and we have visited them all before. If we wanted to like try something else out, you can hit this rollback action. So we're going to go all the way back before we moved anywhere. There, we've just selected our characters. So now I will try to move all the way to Golgos's laboratory. I get an error. There's no way to get there. That's because we have not yet visited the cell, which is the room that actually connects them. So that's good. That's how Taelmoor should work. All looks fine. Awesome. So everything has showed up here, which is great. And one thing that is worth calling out here is that not all of the elements are in the target list. And that's because of where we put everything. We don't see Golgos in here. We don't see his notes. We don't see anything that is not in this room, but we do see the hidden corpse, and we do see Argonas and his book of spells. The reason we can see the other rooms is you can always see all the rooms because a lot of the time it's possible to interact with rooms even if you're not in them because they are, their locations in themselves. So that all looks good. If we did move to the cell and then move to Golgos's laboratory, well, actually, let's see what's in the cell. Great, the cage is in there. That's correct. Moving to his laboratory, we've got Golgos and his notes. Perfect. That means we set everything up exactly how we wanted. All right, so you notice that when I try to do basically anything, it says like nothing happens. So if we go back to like Argonas's laboratory and I try to talk to Argonas, there's no way to interact with that. And then before we saw nothing happens when I tried to use one thing on another thing. That's because we didn't do any logic. So jump back to the Edit tab, click on Logic, and we're going to see a lot of stuff here. This is where you're going to spend by far most of your time. Since we already set up all the elements, we're never going to go into that again. It all works fine. We're good. The only reason you would go back in there is if you wanted to change out the QR code for something or you forgot something. Same thing for the layouts. The rooms are now linked. We don't ever need to mess with that ever again. The logic, however, we're going to be just messing with constantly. So one thing to let's start with adding an inspect, something that happens when you inspect the cauldron room. One thing that's worth calling out here is in play mode, it said examine, and here it says inspect. That's just because it used to be inspect, and we renamed it examine midway through development. And they are exactly the same thing. Don't get hung up on inspect or examine. We'll use them interchangeably. So what we want to do is make it so that if I examine the laboratory, that it says something, not just there's nothing new from your search. So one cool way to do that is when I try to do a thing, the Barbarian Examine Magic Room, I can click this handy-dandy little edit guide here, and that will automatically take me to where that action goes in the logic. So sometimes if you want to edit something and you're trying to remember where it actually came from, you can click that and it will jump you right over. So it's a really quick way to go back and forth. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new block. A block is also known as an action block, is basically a little chunk of logic that determines what happens when you inspect the cauldron room. So this left list is all of the targets. These are all the different things that you could do something to. So the cauldron room, Argonis, book. These are all the elements that we have in our game. And then there's two special ones here. There's global, which is if there is no target for something, like if that thing has no logic, then it will fall back to global. It's sort of the catch-all. And then character is for if you do something to any of the characters. So you could interact with one of the characters. You could, by characters I mean the players, like the barbarian or the cleric. You could inspect them or examine them, same thing. And that you can write what happens there. So going back to Cauldron Room, this is when you do something to Cauldron Room. What do you do when you inspect it? This is what happens. So inspecting Cauldron Room here. We could also do something for when you interact with it. We could do something for if you use Cauldron Room on itself, if you used Argonis on the Cauldron Room. All these different things you can write stuff for. And all you have to do is click Add New Block for that. So let's go back to this. Here's what happens when you inspect the Cauldron Room. So the most important thing is that you always want to show a message when something happens, because otherwise the players get no feedback, nothing will exist, it will look broken. So first thing we'll do is click message here. Message is what the player sees, and then there's a bunch of different options for things that the message can display. We almost always only care about text. We can show a title or an image. You'll notice if you've played Taelmoor, in some of the scenarios, very rarely an image pops up as well. That's for particularly dramatic moments. So like as an example, we could select one here. Oh, these look broken. Well, let's forget that then. But you'd be able to select one of the images from the game. And then the text here is what's most important. So notice this concept of this little key and then this little voice balloon. This is basically a way that you can reuse text. So when you create a string, it always has what's called a key. That's sort of like the name of it. So like if you say Eli, you're always referring to me. If you say Zach, you're always referring to my brother. If you say Cauldron Room, inspect text, you're always going to be referring to this string. So we can just stick with that. That makes sense to be the name for this thing. But I could name it whatever I want. I could do like, boopy boop, whatever. And that would be a string that it's going to search for. So that's a way that allows you to reuse stuff. And just to call out right now, undo works great in this. So I don't actually want boop bob, so I'll just do Command or Control Z or click this button up here, and it's just going to go back to that. So anyway, editing this guy, this stuff in the voice bubble is what the user actually sees. So I can type anything I want in here. Let's put in something for when you inspect the room. I've got a bunch of text there that you could copy. I'm not going to write it all, but we'll just say like, this is a really cool, dank, magic-y room. Whoa-wee. And then we will just hit a check mark. Great. Let's go back to play mode. You'll notice that it still says nothing new from your search here. That's because what it shows is from what I played through in the last time I edited my scenario. So if I want to just reapply all the same actions again, then all I have to do is hit this reapply button, and it's going to basically replay all the exact same things I did, but with the new scenario file that I just made by editing it. So let's click that. Awesome. It pulled the new string that we had. This is really cool, dank, magic-y room. Whoa! So perfect. That means that we put a string in. One thing that you'll notice is that it has not mentioned anything about Argonis or the Book of Spells. We're just like, it's a cool room. There's nothing like useful there. If you imagine the players in actual Taelmoor, this text is all that they see. That is it. They do not know that Argonis is in this game. They don't know to grab EE. As far as they're concerned, Argonis is just sitting in their box. So it's really, really, really important for you to mention important things in the text. So we're going to show you how to do that first. So jumping in here, we're going to go to this, and we're going to say, standing there is an old dude named Argonis. But let's say I can't remember this dude's name or something. You can use this cool thing. So you type in these double braces here. It's the curly brace, which is kind of near your delete key. You're going to hold shift. And you can put in any, it's called string evaluation. So there's very simple code and logic that you use throughout Taelmoor if you wanted to make a condition or if you want to put dynamic text in. So anytime you put this double curly bracey thing inside one of these texts in a message, it will dynamically pull that value. So we could put like just a straight up number in here, and it's just going to compute to a number. There's nothing special about that. But what we can do here that's really awesome is we can say Argonis dot full name and then parentheses. If you're familiar with programming at all, these parentheses basically say this is a function, which means it's code that is executed. And Argonis is the person that we're trying to get the name of. So we're saying, what's the full name of Argonis? Hit the check mark. Awesome. This is what it's going to show. It's going to show his name followed by his QR code. Really, really important to show the QR code, especially because that's what piece they know to put down. If I just wanted to show the QR code, then I could say card name instead of full name. So in that case, I would say, there is an old wizard guy. Maybe the players don't know his name yet, so I just want to say his QR code. There's an old wizard guy, EE. Nice. If we go back to the play mode, we reapply our actions again. Look at that. Standing there is an old wizard guy, EE. So this is approximately what they will see in the app. And that's how they know, oh, I got to grab one of the character pieces, and it's going to be the code EE. And so they will put Argonis down in the room. Really, really important. Again, that's like one of the most important things to remember, because a lot of the time, especially in the editor, when you can just easily grab Argonis from this list, you'll forget that players have no idea that he's there unless you tell them. So, old wizard guy, EE, and we can add some other stuff too. He is looking over a book. And we can do, oh, I did too many. Book.card name. J3. Beautiful. So same thing, it'll work great, and we could do full name if we wanted. Delete that part. He is looking over Argonis' Book of Spells. A bit weird to do that, so let's undo. We don't want that. We're going to go back to book. Now the players will know, okay, I have to add EE, and I need to add J3 to that row. Works super well. One final thing you can do here that's good to know is I could just be like, it is called, and then I could say book.name. That's the English name of the book. It's called Argonis' Book of Spells. So if we go back to play mode, reapply the actions, look at that. Beautiful. It's got the little item icon telling you to grab an item. Sweet. So that's how you do logic. One thing I want to show as well is if I type something screwed up in here, let's say I do an extra curly brace like I did before and I don't notice, you'll get an error up here. Click that arrow open, string evaluation at string cauldron room inspect text, cauldron room inspect text, unknown character, this thing. Great. So we just need to go in here and edit that, and boom. Now that goes away. Huzzah! All right, I'm going to pause. Any questions around any of that? Sweet. One thing I want to point out here too is in the Help tab, you have this Evaluation API section. This is a list of all of the things that you could type in between curly braces. There's a lot of stuff. So like I could check to see if like who the current player is. I could check to see if there's any player who has a certain class, how much time has passed, what turn that people entered the room. There's all kinds of stuff that you can use to do really complex things. And then you also can change stuff here, like you could move the players to a different room. But you can't do that, obviously, in text. That's a different thing, which we'll get into in a bit. All right, so we went through all of this stuff already, which is great. This is just showing you how to do all the names of things. And next up, we're going to kind of go through what's missing here. So we notice when we start the game, select our characters, there's just no text. So if you imagine playing in Taelmoor, I selected my characters, I jumped in, and there's just nothing. Like, once again, I will have no idea what pieces to put down. I'll be like, I have my barbarian, I have my cleric card, and there's nothing else. I have no idea what to do. So we need to add an intro message. There are two different intro opportunities. You have an init opportunity and a start opportunity. You want to do these in global. Init happens when the game is first created, so before characters are selected. You almost never want to use this unless maybe this is a part 2 or something like that, and you might say, hey, go back to the part 1 before you play this one or something. So what you really want probably is start. This is after the characters are selected. This is when the scenario actually starts. This is what kicks everything off. So let's add a new block here. We're going to put a message in. This time let's do a title. It's a nice new thing. We're going to put a title at the top. Global start title. You can see on the right here, I wrote a bunch of cool text, but we're going to just keep it simple. A spell string of magical murders. And then we'll add some text underneath. Lots of people died. Oh no. I'm not going to write everything. But this is the most important bit to call out. You start here. You start in. What's this called? Cauldron room. This is why it's important that you write a name that is logical. We'll call it full name. You start in there. And we can just do it like that. Boom. If we wanted to, we could mention some of the stuff that's in the room in this start message too. Because if you think about it, players, when they start the game, they're probably already in that room, right? So maybe their characters have already looked around. So in this bigger message, I say, Argonis is waiting for you there. So then the players would already know, okay, I'm putting A7 down and I have Argonis. But maybe they don't know about his book until they search the room manually, which is what the inspect would have done. So let's go ahead and add Argonis in here. You started in his laboratory, and we're going to say Argonis dot full name waits for you there. Cool. So let's go back to the play mode, and in fact, let's save it. Downloaded more crap to my downloads folder. That's fine. And there's nothing. Let's reapply all the actions. Nice. So we get this nice title, A Foul String of Magical Murders. And then we get this text that we put in. You start in Argonis' laboratory, and Argonis waits for you there. So now the players know, okay, sweet, I'm going to slap down A7, I'm going to put the party in there, and Argonis is standing in A7. Awesome. And the next thing they would probably do is either talk to Argonis or maybe examine the room. When you examine the room, nice, we show this thing. And it tells us about the book as well. So just remember that there always needs to be a way for people to find out about the stuff that's in the room. This is just such an important core concept that everybody forgets. Like there's this hidden corpse in here, right? Players will have no idea, which is actually the point here because we're going to reveal the corpse through some of the storyline after you do some more stuff. All right, so moving on from there, let's do the other thing, which is interacting with Argonis. Right now, nothing happens. That's not what we want. So let's jump over. Argonis interact. So when you interact with something, that's you trying to manipulate it as a character. So maybe picking it up, or could be like punching something even, or any like when you're trying to change something. If we want to talk to somebody, there's a special case which makes it so they are an NPC. You don't actually want to use interact. You want to go down here to dialogue. You select that, and then you get this third box. This is all the different stuff that you can ask him about. So we're going to have to write a bunch of text here, and this is why we're saying don't add too many dialogue characters, because if you ask him about the cauldron room, he needs to say one thing. If you ask him about Argonis, he needs to say something else. If you ask him about yourself, maybe he says something. So let's add that first. We'll do the character since we have that selected. We'll click Add New Block. Now it's created this dialogue block for him, which means that he is now an NPC. So he will initiate dialogue when we interact with him. So let's put in a message. We're going to add some text. You'll notice that the options for the message has really changed here. This stuff is for super advanced. You could basically make it so the person who's talking, instead of being the old man, all the images are broken, I'm going to have to fix that. But instead of being the old man, it might look like, for example, Golgos, the mage guy, or it might look like your own character. And that's how you can make dialogues totally different from this sort of simple back and forth thing. But we don't need to worry about that. That's highly complicated. So we're just going to text when you ask him about the character. And let's have him say, I love you. You're the best. One thing that you'll note here is that I wrote the text like this, but I actually want to put quotes around it because that signifies this is the character talking. So we might say some narration. Argonis, yeah, I spelled that right, eyeballs you. I love you, you're the best. So when this goes into the app, it's going to show this as like a little narrative piece, and then it's going to go show this as text that he actually says. So you need quotes whenever you're in dialogue for stuff that people say. So if we go back to play mode, we rerun this. Instead of saying no way to interact, it should change it to enter dialogue. You begin a conversation with Argonis. Nice. Now we're in dialogue with him. He's considered an NPC. Let's have the barbarian ask about other. This is something that's worth learning about because we just did something for the character. You can hit other here. You can put any QR code in just to see what happens. By default, it doesn't add the characters to this list because that would just be really unwieldy, and you don't usually want to mess around with the characters. But in this case, we're going to ask about ourselves. C1, which is the barbarian's QR code. I love you. You're the best. Awesome. If we ask him about his laboratory, I don't know what that is. That's the default for when an NPC doesn't have text written. So let's jump back over here, dialogue, and his cauldron room. Text. This is my cool lab. There are totally not any hidden bodies here. Nice. Now we can go back, replay. Nice. So I think you get the idea here. This is just sort of a back and forth at its simplest. You ask one thing and another thing is what they say back to you. We're not going to do this in this tutorial, but if you were to build out this whole scenario, you're going to want to put something in for pretty much everything. Maybe if he didn't know about something, you might say, I don't know what that is, and that might be the proper response. But otherwise, you probably want to fill everything out. There's a few other things here that you can use. By the way, you can always learn about what these things mean if you go to the Help menu and go to Events. All of these init, start, whatever, it tells you what they all mean. So let's go to dialogue fallback. What does that mean? When the user asks about something that is not within the dialogue block, then this block will be called if it exists. Otherwise, if that doesn't exist, it'll use dialogue/fallback, which is, I don't know what that is, which is what happened. So if we want to do a different fallback, just for fun, let's do that. Text. I ain't got no idea. We can go back to play. Rerun. Oh, right, we got to ask him about something he doesn't know about. Let's go with his book of spells. I ain't got no idea. Great. That worked. So, as I was saying, you're going to want to fill all these things out. You might also want an enter thing for when dialogue starts. Maybe it says like, oh, he looks super worried. He's like really shifty-eyed or something, whatever. This is all the messages that will appear when you begin. So there's a bunch of stuff that you might think about doing, like, what does he think of Golgos? Who is he if you ask him about himself? Does he know anything about what Golgos has been researching? Why is there a dead body in there? Of course, if you were to ask them about the gore, the player's never going to scan this unless they know the gore is there. So that means that you don't have to worry about them scanning it prematurely because they can't spoil it for themselves. They don't know the piece exists because you haven't told them. All right, and here is what it looks at when it's kind of filled out entirely. Let's save the scenario again. And we can test all that stuff with our Argonis, which we basically did. And one thing that you'll notice as well that I sort of showed you, but if you wanted to ask him about Golgos, for example, Golgos is not an option because Golgos is not in this room. But it's actually okay to ask people about things outside of the room. So let's hit Other. We're going to type in Golgos. His QR code is EK. We will ask. He doesn't have any idea because we didn't write any text for it, but you can see that we actually asked him about Sorcerer, which is the other guy. All right, I will pause there. Any questions? Cool. All right, well, I'll keep going through here. I think we're moving right along. So one thing about that we call out here is that we have no idea that the cell is next to this room. So the players are basically going to drop in. They're going to know that Argonis is there. They're going to know that they're in that laboratory. And then if they explore the room or inspect it, they'll find that there's a book of spells. That's all they will know about. So that's the entire game to them. So let's do something in order to reveal the next room. There's usually 3 different ways that you might reveal a room. The first one is going to be something like solving a puzzle, like maybe you open a door, you solve some riddle that makes a trap door appear, whatever it is. That's usually how we'll do it to reveal the next room, like you defeat some obstacle, because you don't want to just have all the rooms just ready to go from the very beginning, or then people just move and it's not very linear. It might be confusing for the players and difficult for you to write. The second option, which is pretty common, not quite as, is when you search a room. So inspect might reveal the next room. And then sometimes you might just call it out when you first enter the room. So the first time that we walk into the cell, we probably are going to see that it's got doors to both sides. So that would be a way to do that. The problem with doing it that way some of the time is that you end up with a situation where players are adding a ton of stuff at once, because when they move into that room, you're going to be telling them, add the laboratory, add Golgos, add the book, everything that they need to put into that room. And then it will also say, add this other room. And that's just another piece for them to put down. So it's generally good to avoid doing this, but sometimes it makes the most sense. So what we're going to do for this is let's just do it when you search the room here. We already have that going. So we'll just add to this message. There is a doorway to the east that leads to cell.full name of the cell. Great. So now if we go back to play mode, then when we first inspected it, it already told them about the cell. So now they'll be like, okay, I'm done in this room. Argonis is not telling me anything. He's got no idea. What a bastard. Let's go ahead and move to the cell. Once again, we see nothing happening, no message. That's not great. So let's go ahead and write a message for when you move to the cell. So we can go into here. Here's the cell. When you first enter this room, we'll add a new block. We'll add a message, add some text. You enter the magical cell that is magically between the 2 magic people's lab. To the west is Argonas's lab. Why didn't I do this way? Cauldron room, dot full name. And to the east is experiment room, dot full name. Boom. You notice that I did the third option, which I said is one that you shouldn't do. The reason for that is that there's not really anything to do in the cell. There's not much to be added. There's one other thing that I forgot to mention here, which is the cage. The magical cage dot card name sits in the middle of the room. When you know who to arrest, use the item. Well, we'll just say use the cage, and then we'll do cage.card name again on them. The magical cage J4 sits in the middle of the room. When you know who to arrest, use the cage J4 on them. To the west is this, and to the east is that. Nice. So go back to play mode, replay. The message appeared. Woohoo! So now the player will know to move to one or the other. They can either go back to the laboratory or they can go to Golgos's laboratory. They're probably going to try to examine the cell, which you learn nothing new from your search. So same deal, we need to add that message here. This is a cool cell, etc. Great, that works. I'm not going to add all of the logic here. This is something that you'll be able to do on your own. But in general, you're going to want to add the examine for this room. You're going to want to do what happens when they examine the cage, maybe when they interact with the cage, because right now nothing will happen. So all these things you would need to edit, add a message, that kind of thing. Something that is worth calling out here is you probably don't need to do that, but when it says use the cage J4 on them, something you can do is show the button for it. So I can say use item.card name, and then that will show this use item thing, which looks like the button that you have in the actual game. So that's an option of what you can do. You can also do, if you look from this list here, you could do inspect.cardName. It will look like the inspect button that's in the app. Examine does the same thing. Interact, move, and wait. Those are all ways to basically talk about the button in a way that both will be more obvious to the player because it matches that UI, and it will also automatically be like localized, because if we ever translate this into French or something, this would just automatically say like inspecte or whatever inspect is in French, instead of inspect or examine. Examine, whatever it is. All right, and then also you can make things italic, bold, underline, etc. There's a couple ways to do it. You can use just simple HTML tags like I or B or U for underline and so on. You can also use markup formatting, underscores and asterisks. All right, so the last thing here is Golgos's laboratory. So let's go ahead and move there. Once again, we have nothing, so we want to have an enter message. Enter. Message, text. You're in a way cooler lab. As usual, we need to say Golgos is sitting there. He is looking at notes. Full name. Golgos is sitting there. He's looking at Golgos experiment notes. Sweet. Remember, as usual, you got to talk about what's in the room, unless it's something that is kind of hidden and you expect the player to need to explore to find it. You might put it in the inspect versus the enter in that case. So, replay. Nice. We're in a way cooler lab. Golgos is sitting there. He's looking at his notes. Now, once again, the players know Golgos exists. They know to talk to him, and so on. So let's make Golgos a dialogue-enabled character, an NPC. Let's do the enter thing here. Comment, that's the wrong thing. Message, text. Leave me alone! Nice. Now if we go back to play and we interact with the Golgos, dialogue has started and he has said, leave me alone. And now, of course, if we ask him about absolutely anything, he's going to say, I don't know what that is, because we didn't write any of the text. So the same deal, we're not going to do this here, but you would need to add all these different responses to things. This is why dialogue-enabled characters is pretty expensive. You get a lot of text to write. All right. So now we're going to go into code, executing simple code. For this case, all we're doing is setting a variable. But variables are really important to make it possible to do more advanced stuff. So in this example, what we're going to do is you go to Golgos's room, you talk to him, you talk to Argonis. They both don't seem to think that they're doing anything wrong. But Golgos is going to say, hey, one time I was in Argonis's lab, and it seemed like he had a hidden room if you pull a book out of his bookcase. Once he's told you that, if you explore or inspect or examine or whatever Argonis's laboratory, then we want the player to be like, oh, I need to look for a book, and they'll be able to find it, and that will reveal the secret dead body. The only way to do that is to add a variable in. So we're going to click on this Variables tab here. You can see we can add a bunch of different types here. We can add a variable that's true, false, which is probably the most common that you'll use. That's just for if something has happened or not. So we're going to add one of those. We're going to select it. We're going to rename the key. This is the name of the variable. Once again, this UI is not great. We will improve it. Golgos gave hint. You should use lower camel case as usual. Hit the check mark. Now this variable is called Golgos gave hint, and it starts with a value of false. We could make it start with true if we wanted, but we want false because Golgos has not given a hint. At the very start of the game, this is what you want this value to correspond to. No hint has been given, so it's false. So now we have that variable. Awesome. Now if we go back to the logic, we're talking about dialogue with Golgos. Let's say you ask Golgos about Argonis's room. He's going to tell you to look in a secret place. So we'll add a block, add a message, and be like, I was in that room one time and I saw Argonis pull a book and it opened a secret alcove. So normally the player would know, right? Oh, I need to go back and like pull on a book or something. But as far as the scenario is concerned, there's no like way of knowing that that's happened unless we check on this little variables box. So let's check that. And we can either set a variable or execute a function. Let's set a variable. Golgos gave hint. It's the only thing we can set because we only have one variable. And we're going to set it to true. So now, after talking to this guy, Golgos gave hint is going to be set to true. So from then on, we can use that variable to do different stuff. Just to show while I'm here, you could also execute a function, which just gives you straight up text you can type into. And that matches, if you go to the Help tab again, the Evaluation API, it matches all of these things. So for example, like I mentioned before, we could move all of the players to the Cauldron Room just instantly. Like once he tells you, hey, there's a book there, your characters just teleport. You normally would not want that to happen in a situation like this. It would probably be like they pull a lever or they try to jump down a chute, or maybe when they open a door, you just move them through. That's when you would do this kind of thing. But that string-based, that calling a function, that's how you do a lot of the complex stuff. You can start like patrols for characters to like move around on their own. You can make them win or lose the game. You can give them buffs so that in combat they're stronger or weaker. There's a lot of different stuff you can do. They're all in here. So going back, we're just going to delete this because we actually don't need it. So we're just setting Golgos gave hint to true. So now if I go to where it should matter, we're going to say Cauldron Room and inspect. So Right now, every single time you inspect a cauldron room, it's going to say this exact same message over and over again. Let's check that out. So, well, actually, before I do that, first I'm going to show you something here. If I replay all my actions and then now I click View State, this is the data from the whole scenario. Every single thing from the players playing through this is represented here. So you can see all the different actions I've ever done are stored here, the abilities that the characters have, which we'll get into, any messages that we're going to show, what room we exited from. There's all kinds of stuff here. Where all the different things are. Argonis is in the cauldron room. The book is in the cauldron. The cage in the cell. Those are all here in this state. Every single thing. You can simplify what you see to see a subset. The most common one is useful because it's got useful stuff. It shows you how much time has passed, what player's turn it is, the room that everybody's in, the value of the variables, and where all the elements are. This is useful to have. But you could also see like data on all of the players or enemies. There are no enemies. Or the messages being shown. So this is just useful for diving in if you need to see exactly what's going on. In this case, what we care about is the variables. So this is correct. Great. Golgos has not given a hint. But if we're already talking to Golgos, if we ask him about Argonis' laboratory, he says he saw the alcove. Now we can look. Nice. This set our variable to true. So that's verified that that's correct. Awesome. So let's end dialogue. Move to Argonis' laboratory. Now we're here. And every time we examine his laboratory, it's just going to show this exact same, just like a million times, right? Nothing changes. What we want to have happen is we're going to add a condition here. So first thing we need to do is add another block. I'm going to click that button. You notice this red thing here, unreachable block. Add a condition to the blocks above. Hit this little arrow to move this up. And now this old one that we had says unreachable block. What this means is that now every single time we inspect the cauldron room, this first thing's going to happen. Because the way that this works, you can add like a bazillion blocks, right? I can just do block, block, block. These can all have their own messages. So this could be that message, this could be a different one, this could be another one, so on. And so you're able to conditionally show one thing or another based upon some value, like where the players are, or a variable, or anything else. But the way that it does it is it goes through in order. So first it'll try this block, and it will say, does this block have a condition? If it does not have a condition, it'll just choose that block no matter what. So that's the equivalent of just having one block. This guy will get chosen every single time, which means this thing can never get chosen. Same as all these other ones. That's what this unreachable block means. If I add a condition, though, now it's possible for this one to get chosen if this condition evaluates to false. What do we want to put in here? We're going to put in Golgos gave a hint is true. If Golgos gave a hint, we're going to do this block. Otherwise, we're going to do this block. And then we've got all these extra ones. That will never happen because this one has no condition. So we'll just kill these. That was for an example. But if we wanted to have a really complicated situation where if Golgos gave a hint, you do this. If the players have revealed the body, you do this. If the players have done that, you do this. Then you can do a bunch of different things. So one thing we can add in here is a condition. This is one of the reserved things we can use. Action was due. One of the reserved things we can do. Action was tried before. You'll see that that is in the evaluation API somewhere in here. I'm going to do a search for it. There it is. Returns true if the action being performed has already been performed on the chosen target. So this is a way to show like different messages. So now we can say inspect, let's call it repeat or something. The first time you inspect the room, it wants to say you want to put a ton of detail in. The second time, it doesn't need to have as much. You search around again, but without more information, you can't find anything new. And then we can just do the same thing, or we can say argonis.fullname continues to read his book.fullname. That's kind of mouthy. Let's say book, and we'll change this one to card name. Argonis continues to read his book. Sick. So basically, if we've inspected already, then we're going to see this one. If Glogos gave his hint, we're going to see this one. And we don't need this extra one. That was just for illustration, so let's remove it. So if we go back to here and we reload, we're not going to see any messages because we didn't put a message here. So let's do that actually really quick. We don't want to inspect text. We want to inspect /hint given or something. The reason is, I should tell you about this actually. Because this key is the same as the key that we put here, here, cauldron inspect text, cauldron inspect text, that string is the same string. That's how you can reuse text, like I said. If we go to the string section here, all of the strings we've ever made are in this list. Cauldron inspect text is that string. So at the end of the day, that unique name is how you identify these different things. So if I wanted to show this cage name a bunch of different times, I could say cage/name over and over again if I wanted to, for example. So in order to change this, I can't just edit it here, like if I add another wahoo, right? Because I'm editing this string, look at this one. This one also says wahoo because they're pointing to the exact same text. It's like you have a save file and you're loading that file. So let's change this to not have wahoo, and we're going to change the key to be had hint or something like that. Now this is a new string. The reason it says error missing string is we haven't given it any text yet. So we're going to edit it, and we're going to say what happens when you explore, when you know that there's a thing. So acting on Golgos's advice, you pull a book from the shelf, and it causes a secret alcove to open. You peek inside and see all kinds of bad stuff, including gore.card name, including a dead body. JT. All right, let's go back to play mode. All of these should now say that same message when we reload it. Nice. Because every time it's going to say Golgos gave hint true. So this is another example of maybe we do want another block here. What if you've already tried this action and he's given a hint? Maybe we want to show something different that time. I'm not going to fill it out, but you could use action was tried before, or you could set a different variable, that kind of thing. So going back here, now the players would know that there's a dead body, right? So they would interact with the dead body perhaps, or inspect it, examine it, or maybe they'll talk to Argonis and talk to him about it. The point is that the dead body is going to reveal to the players that Argonis is the villain, and so the players will then use the cage on Argonis to arrest him. One thing I want to show here or talk about is that we've made the corpse be in this room this whole time, right? If we go back to our elements, the gore is in the cauldron room. A more accurate way of doing this, perhaps, would be to make this to be nowhere. Now nobody can do anything with the gore. It doesn't exist anywhere until, if we go back to our logic, once this text appears, we can set a variable, execute a function, move element to current room, gore.id. Now what this is going to do is it's going to move the gore into the cauldron room only when we've explored and found it, which is probably more close to what really, you'd expect the scenario to be working like. And this also would protect you from like if players are just literally scanning every piece from the box for some reason to see if any of them do anything. This would stop that from being possible until they've already talked to Golgos. So if we go back and we reload, well, apparently I broke something. Oh, I know why. So something worth talking about here. Actually, this is worth talking about in general. So what it's saying is it can't redo all of my actions because I just changed the scenario in a way so that the player's turns will shift. In the previous version of the scenario, it was the cleric's turn, but now it's the barbarian's turn. So what I can do is I can hit this OK button, and then that will rewind back until the bug happened. So the reason that happened is every single time that we examine the laboratory, it's going to change the turn, if you notice. The barbarian, the cleric, even though it's showing the same thing. The reason for that is Taelmoor logic is your turn is changed when you inspect something for the first time or when a variable is executed. Because the variable considers that something has happened, it's like, okay, this person has done something useful, so we're going to pass the turn on to someone else. The turn also passes if somebody is the first one to move to another room. So before, we were not setting a variable, and we had already inspected the cauldron room, if you remember way back here when we showed this message. So it considered it to be a repeat action. So it was like, okay, this is a repeat. Players are not learning anything new, so I'm not going to use up that person's turn. But now, because this variable gets executed, it's like, oh, something important is happening. They did something, so I will use up their turn. You can, at any time, change the way that works by saying, I always want to use up the person's turn when they do this thing, or I never want to use up the person's turn when they do this thing. If you leave it normally, then it will do it automatically like this. So one thing that's worth mentioning here is like that probably shouldn't have been using up everybody's turns because they're just doing the exact same thing over and over again. So that's a case where, as I mentioned before, we might want to add another block. We can go put this at the top again. Just keep moving it up. And this is going to be element is in current room, core.id. So now this is saying, do this if the gore is already here. So we're going to add some text in, inspect, gore found. Now that you already found the secret alcove, there is no more exploring to do. Now, if we go back here and we replay, it's going to give us another error because the turn order is going to change now again. So let's hit OK. Nice. So we first did a thing and it changed the turns. Now every single time we examine, it's not going to change the turns because nothing is happening. That's a good general rule of thumb to know that if you change something so that the turn order will change, then this replay button is not going to be able to succeed because the player is going to have shifted their turns. All right. Anyway, so we found the gore. Awesome. The next step is going to be to arrest the player or the enemy guy, the evil magician. So that's pretty easy. We're going to use Argonis as a target and Cage as the action. Add a new block. And then we're going to say you arrest Argonis. He is bad. Good job. And then set a variable, execute a function, win game. Nice. Now if we go back to play, you notice we can't use the cage here because the cage is not in this room. So that's another question here. Maybe we want to go back to these elements And we want to put the cage everywhere, actually. So we can edit this, make it everywhere, and now you can use it from any place. Reapply everything, and then there's the cage. We can use it on Argonis. You rest Argonis. He's bad. Good job. The game is won. Well, all done. Hooray! For fun, let's go back into the logic, and for Golgos, we can add the cage, add a new block. Golgos was not the bad guy. You fool! Execute function, lose game. Go back. Let's move to Golgos' laboratory. Use the cage on Golgos. You fool! Nice. So this is a playable game. Hooray! But this is obviously, if we're looking back to our handy-dandy engagement curve, we're really not following this very well at all. What's the climax? There really isn't. Maybe the climax is you found a dead body or something, but that's not very exciting. So let's add in a final boss battle. So instead of when you use the cage on Golgos, you lose the game, let's unset that, and we're going to trigger combat. So click combat block here, and you're going to see this list here. Combat works similarly to these overall action blocks in that you can have any number of these that you want, and it's going to keep going through all of them until it has filled up the roster with enemies, so at most 6 enemies. So you could do something like add in just 1 goblin and 5 of something else or whatever. You can also have conditions for each of these, so same deal. I could be like, if there are more than 4 players, then I want to use this one, but otherwise I won't use it. So if you had only 2 players, you wouldn't add this one. That's kind of important some of the time for balancing because it's a lot harder usually with just 2 characters. But in general, we're just going to go back to 1 simple block here, which often is fine. And there's 3 things we have to determine. We have to determine who the enemies are that we're going to fight, how many of them we're going to fight, and how strong they are, their level. So the options here are, they're either a predefined enemy group, they are a custom enemy group where you say exactly which enemies are in it, or they are a dynamic predefined group, meaning that they're going to use the results of an evaluation function, or a dynamic custom group. Again, they will use the results of an evaluation function. For now, we're just going to go with custom. So we just choose how many enemies we want to put in. So let's put in the Lich is going to be first. The old man's going to transform into a Lich to fight you, because he's actually an evil Lich guy. And then we're going to add in his skeleton monsters. So we'll add in a skeleton archer, and let's just do a bunch of those. Skeleton archer, and another skeleton. You'll notice I can't add more than 6, just like I said. So this is the list that we pull enemies from, but we only make as many enemies as this thing says down here, the enemy count. So say that we just want to make exactly 2 enemies, then this is going to do the Lich and then the skeleton, and it will not create any of these other ones. If we say 6, let's create all of them, it's going to do all of them in this order: Lich, skeleton, skeleton, archer, skeleton, etc. What I like to use generally is player count offset, which is it's going to check how many players there are, and it's going to add this value to how many players there are, and then create that many enemies. Let's just keep it at 0, which means with 2 players, you're going to fight a Lich and a skeleton. With 6 players, you're going to fight this whole thing. And then the enemy levels is how hard they are. I like to use a level offset as well, where I can say a level offset of 0 means they're the same skill as the players. If you add 1, that's usually going to be like a little bit of a tricky battle, but it's totally doable. 2 is usually quite a difficult battle. 3 is nearly or completely impossible. And then same thing going in this direction. -1 is like quite easy. -2 is insanely easy. -10 is just like don't even try. Like you'll just kill every. They have like 1 HP. So 0 is often a good one to go with. I like 0 or 1 generally, but there's also something to consider, which is which enemies there are. If we go back to the Help tab here, and we click on Combat Data here, it tells you all the different enemy types that you can use. And part of that is it tells you a bit about each of these enemies. So the Abomination is strong. He's slow. He's got high health. He does medium-high damage to single targets. The Dragon is boss level in strength. Medium speed, but he's got huge health, high damage. He does a bunch of debilitating effects, AoE. It is the strongest enemy. The Lich is also boss level, very strong. So thinking about that and going back to the combat thing here, you might be like, I want the Lich to be at a level of 0 or -1, but I want the skeletons to all be at like 1 or something like that to make them harder. To do that, you would do the combat block stuff. So for the first one, we would just add the Lich. We would have only ever one enemy. And then we would make his level offset 0. And then we would do another one here. And we could actually just do predefined skeletons group. And then the player count offset, we want to do -1 because we already created one guy up here. So if there's 2 players, it's just going to make 1 skeleton. And then let's make them a little stronger. So it makes the Lich first, and then it makes a bunch of mooks to fill up the rest of the space, and they're going to be a little stronger than normal mooks to make it a tough battle. That would be an example of how you could do that, but I'm going to undo all of that and go all the way back to what we had here, just because that is the simplest and easiest to understand. Sweet. Okay, so when we use the cage on Golgos, we will go into combat. So let me go back. We are in Argonis' laboratory. I'm going to use the cage on Argonis. Oh, I forgot to reload the thing, I think. I pressed the wrong thing now. Use the cage on Argonis. What did I do wrong? Oh, did I edit the wrong one? Oh yeah, that's if you do Golgos. Whoops. Well, it's a great thing you can do. See this button here? Copy? I can click that. Now I can go over to Argonis. This isn't actually what we want here. We want it for the other guy. So I'll paste that block. Nice, this is all the stuff I had. Although now I need to change the text here to Argonis. It's Argonis cage text. Whoops, my bad. Argonis cage text. There, now I got his thing. Now let's copy that block. Delete it. Cool. Using a cage on Argonis causes the combat. Going back to Golgos. We're just going to kill that and get our other block and change this text to Golgos. Nice. That saved me from having to retype all the variables and the stuff. I just literally was copy pasting. You unfortunately can only copy paste entire blocks right now, but it still can be super useful for cases like that where you make a mistake. So going back to the play mode, let's try that again. So we're going to use the cage on Argonis. Nice. Combat has started. It loads right here. This is the exact same combat code that runs in the app, except it doesn't have a background or icons or stuff, but it still gives you an idea of what's going on. You can select any of the cards that the player would have, that they can possibly have, but this, of course, doesn't deal with like having a hand and drawing and dealing cards and that kind of stuff. So in this case, you can select anything, which means you could totally cheat and just like pull whatever card. This is the equivalent to having your whole deck just splayed out and using whatever you want. So I'll choose Slash, and this guy can choose Bless or something. You can see what the enemies are going to do here, just like the regular game, and then it will play out the actions like this, just like in the game. So we can watch him putting his armor on and the skeletons buffing himself, and then the barbarian does damage, and so on. Awesome. Usually when you're editing a scenario, you don't want to do the whole combat, so you can click this Use Nuke button for every character. You can see now he's going to do just a crazy amount of damage. You win combat instantly. Just a way to get through stuff quickly. All right, so we won the combat, which caused us to level up, and we didn't see any message. This is the next thing to mess with. So Argonis, we fought him in a cauldron room. So once we finish combat in the cauldron room, we're going to add a new block here, and that is where we will win the game. And we're going to have a message that says, the evil witch that was Argonis dies. Good job. Replay. Nice. We won the game. One thing you'll notice here is we still have a level up message, which is kind of weird if you're about to win the game because there's no point in leveling up. So we can go to this combat finished block. We can uncheck this level up box. Go back. Replay. There, level up message is gone, and we won the game. All right, that is the full simple scenario tutorial. There's tons of other stuff to do in here, like adding, all those different things that we had. There's one other thing actually, which is how to get it in the app. So let's go over that really quick. So I've got my scenario. I'm going to save it again. I'm going to go to File. See this export thing? Every time I save it, it's been downloading my export data, but I could also click this to download it again. And I need to enter a URL. So you can upload stuff anywhere on the internet. I have our Taelmoor website here. I'm just going to go into the scenarios folder, and we'll just drop in death malfeasance. Pop that in there. I'm going to rename this just to get rid of that 4 on it. Actually, it doesn't even matter. Let's copy the URL, paste it here. My app makes an FTP link, which is not what we want. Let's do an HTTP link. All right, so that thing that we just made is now a QR code. So now I can go into the app, which you can see here. You can't see me doing this on my phone, but I'm going to go into the Taelmoor app, just like these instructions. I'm going to turn it into debug mode. To do that, you have to do this thing. Quite elaborate. You tap the Taelmoor logo 4 times, then you press the hot seat button, then the join game button, then the Taelmoor logo, and you'll see debug at the top of the screen. And then you can click on hot seat. You can click on the very bottom of the list. You'll see custom scenario. You can tap that, click the play button, and then you'll be offered to scan the QR code right off of your screen. Hit confirm, and you will be in the game. All right, that is the end of this tutorial. I will say if you want extra credit after you fill everything out, you should go to this next tutorial, adding backstory and abilities, which we won't go through together, but this is also a reasonably long tutorial around how to basically give every character a unique ability that they can do. And I recommend reading What Makes a Good Scenario, which talks about some of the important things to think about, like the engagement curve and Chekhov's gun.